We're joined by Will Nguyen. He writes for TrekNews.net, and he's also at the convention. Now, Will, our reporter, Maylee, is a Star Trek obsessive. Is it okay to call you that too?
I think that's safe to say.
Don't worry, you're not alone. Now, for people who may not be familiar with the brand, what would you say are some of the key factors behind Star Trek's long-term success across the years?
I think it presents an optimistic message for the future in the sense that humanity in the future can work together and use the diversity of humanity as a strength, and it presents an optimistic vision of the future. And this is the 50th anniversary of the original show, but the show has evolved. It's had 5 live-action spin-offs. It's had 13 movies. There's an upcoming TV series in January 2017. So it's been able to evolve throughout the times while still having an optimistic, hopeful message. In that way, that remains the same, but it remains relevant for new generations.
Now, as you mentioned, you have these reincarnations of the show. You also have the movies. So how much money has the brand generated in its 50-year history, do you think?
I think there's been conflicting reports in terms of who owns what in terms of film and TV and the books and all the merchandise, but some estimates say up to $4 billion in terms of the franchise net worth. I think it's safe to say that it's worth billions of dollars, but to define it to a specific term, it's always a moving target, but it's definitely something that is big business throughout its entire lifespan.
And speaking of big business, being that this is the 50th anniversary year, you have companies like Mattel coming up with their own special anniversary line of Star Trek Barbies. Even the Canadian Mint is producing some special Star Trek currency as legal tender. So how else are companies and industries really embracing the brand's popularity as well as the anniversary?
Right, so actually just to dovetail with your point on the convention here, MAC Cosmetics has an entire stage set up debuting Star Trek specific makeup. And I think that just shows you the fact that the franchise is recognizing that the diversity of its fan base is quite large. I think for a long time, the fan base had a reputation of being only a boys' club, that only boys or men would enjoy this. But as it turns out, women have always been huge Star Trek fans. Women were the ones leading the fan writing campaign to save the show after it got canceled in the 2nd season, to give it the 3rd season. They were one of the first to organize the conventions. So now you start to see that being represented in the merchandise with Barbie and Mattel and MAC and the Canadian Mint. They're recognizing that the demographics are more than just one specific slice. It's a bunch of, it's everyone. And that makes sense in terms of inclusion. It also makes sense economically.
And as you mentioned that role of diversity, Star Trek was really one of the shows that really broke ground in the TV and film industry and tackled a lot of issues considered ahead of its time. How important do you think that was for the entertainment industry?
I think it's the core of the brand. It's the core of what makes Star Trek Star Trek. And I think that's what makes it still relevant now. Obviously, at the time with Star Trek, with having a diverse crew during the height of the Cold War, Vietnam, the civil rights movement, having a black officer, a Russian helmsman, an Asian navigator, having those representations be so prominent allude to the fact that humanity can work through its divisions currently and be able to work together. And obviously that theme has evolved through the various iterations of the show and of the franchise. I think that's at the core, at the heart of what Star Trek is throughout all of its different incarnations.
Now let's really take a look at that global appeal. Which countries would you say are really leading the way in terms of the biggest fan base and the ones that are really spending on the merchandise and going to the films as well? Right.
Well, Star Trek is an American TV show. It's made here by American producers, American companies, CBS and Paramount. So in that sense, it's the American fan base is always the most prominent. Obviously, it's here in Las Vegas, the convention. So America always fits prominently in terms of that. But I'm always amazed when I go to conventions or talk to folks online. There is such a diverse fan base. There are fans in Indonesia, in Japan, in Mexico, in Guatemala. There are huge conventions in Germany and in the UK. I would say, I couldn't quantify the exact amount, but I think it's spread fairly evenly in terms of consumers and fans of Star Trek all around. And I think that just speaks to the vitality of the idea of Star Trek.
Now, Will, the latest film, Star Trek Beyond, cost a whopping $185 million to produce, and the brand is getting some stiff competition from other sci-fi and as well as comic book-based films. So what's next for the franchise? I know you mentioned the new series coming in 2017. I believe Netflix is actually going to be streaming that internationally. Just how big can the brand get?
I think it can be as big as, the sky's the limit. The final frontier is the final frontier. And we just had the major release of Star Trek Beyond back in July. And that was well received by fans, and general audiences alike. And the new series, Star Trek Discovery, is coming in January 2017 exclusively to CBS All Access here in the States. But like you said, it's available internationally on Netflix. And streaming TV is the way of the future in terms of consuming media. Netflix and Hulu has become such important venues for quality TV. And first and foremost, Star Trek has always been at its best when it's a TV show. So that's why I'm personally so excited. I know many others are excited for Star Trek Discovery. Brian Fuller is the showrunner for it. He's done terrific work on Hannibal and Pushing Daisies.
Right.
Really excited to have Star Trek back in its best form, being able to tell long, deep stories on TV.
Well, this has clearly been one of my favorite segments. I'm a huge Trekkie. Thank you so much for joining us. Will Nguyen, writer for TrekNews.net.
My pleasure.